The next speaker we're going to have here is probably a little bit unorthodox for Silicon Slopes audience. I want to kind of explain how this happened. As many of you know, some of you may not, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is a huge, huge, huge part of Utah's culture. It's probably the largest organization in the state. And I've always wanted to hear, how do you run something like that? It's just really fascinating. Like, I mean, it's a worldwide organization, a global organization. How do you run something like that? And what does it mean to run something like that? And it's like the ultimate community in a way, right? Like religion is like community. And so I reached out to him and I said, hey, we would love to have someone come out and talk to us about this. And we got Elder Bednar to come out. And then the church was like, we want Ryan Smith to do the interview. And so I was like, yeah, I would too. So please welcome Elder David A. Bednar and Ryan Smith.
How are you?
It's great.
This is a busy week for the church, and you just made time to come out here, so.
In fact, most of these people will wonder why I'm wearing a suit. I just came from a meeting of our worldwide leadership with folks from 69 different countries who speak 65 different languages.
Wow.
So we met with them from 1:30 until 2:30, scooted over here. So it's going great.
Hey, well, we all appreciate you taking time. I know it's probably not something when you woke up this month, you're like, okay, I'm going to go do Silicon Slopes. And honestly, when I thought about this interview, I was like, oh, wow, this is a little different than Gary Vee yesterday. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, what a cool opportunity. And the more I researched, I mean, we hadn't really met a whole lot. And the more I got to know your background, the more I was like, actually, this is the perfect fit for this group. So I would like to unpack a little bit of that and talk a little bit about you personally, and then roll into kind of everything that's going on globally. And so, how does that sound? All right. So, Elder Bednar, you grew up really in the business world, in the professional worlds, in academia. I grew up as a kid with a father who taught in a business school. That was your path from Purdue University to teaching at Arkansas. What led you down that road, and what was the ultimate goal, or what did you think you would be doing with that, and why did that kind of speak to you?
I think I was influenced by the example of my brother, who was 15 years older than I was. And when I was old enough to know things were going on around me, he was working on his PhD at the University of Minnesota. And interesting, my father was a very middle-class worker guy. And because of the example of my brother, it never occurred to me that I would do anything other than go on and do graduate work. I don't know that I had a specific objective. I just saw what my brother did. I loved, even as a little guy, being around universities. And so part of that passion grew out of that experience and the example of my brother.
Oh, that's cool. There's something invigorating about the academic setting. Like we teach a little class at BYU. I'm actually part-time faculty. I don't know if you've approved that, but it is. And Mike and I teach a little class there, and every time we go on campus, which is super ironic because I grew up as a kid in the Tanner building at BYU, and Larry Miller used to teach on campus, and I remember seeing him thinking, that's the coolest thing on the planet. And now we're in that spot, but it's invigorating. And you specifically chose to study organizational behavior. What intrigued you about that? And I mean, talk about an extremely valuable skill set in your current role.
I think it's a blending of two worlds. When I served as a missionary in Germany, the focus was helping people to change from the inside out as they learn the principles of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Organizational behavior primarily is about helping people change from the outside in, and you need to do both in most instances. So that blending has always been fascinating to me. But the ironic thing is, I have never, ever tried to use my organizational behavior and management background in any of my ecclesiastical responsibilities and in the transition at BYU, Idaho. I've relied on gospel principles, which are the best management instruction you can ever have.
So it is true, what they teach you in school, you don't ever take with you.
I'm informed by it, I'm benefited by it, but I don't let it drive.
In reading your background, and I've gotten to know over the years a lot of folks in Walmart's history from their chairman, and they always talk about Sam Walton as this legendary human that only few got to work with. And you know, I think on a lot of people's list in business, he would be someone that would be one of those, who would you like to have dinner with? Like that's who would come up with if you had a couple people. At University of Arkansas, you got a chance to work very, very closely with Sam. What were the takeaways there, and what are the lessons that you could share with this group? Because I know if you were talking to the executives in Walmart, they would be glued in on everything that you learned from him.
So, you're going to have to control me here.
No,
I could go for
run.
a very long time.
We're here. We'll go.
Sam Walton was authentic before being authentic was cool.
Okay, we're going to stop there. Everyone tweet that. That's a line for your social. Sam Walton was authentic before being authentic was cool. Okay.
So let me give you an example. Sam was legendary for dropping into one of his stores unannounced. He was a pilot. He would fly his own plane. He would make arrangements for someone to pick him up. And then he would just walk into one of the stores and look around. He would take a can of tuna, and he liked saltine crackers. He would gather up associates from the store. He would take them back into the storage area. He would sit on a box. He would open the can of tuna. He would take the saltines, and that was his lunch. And he would ask these questions. What's selling? What's not selling? Help me know what we do in Bentonville that makes it hard for you to do your job well. He didn't have staffers taking notes for him. In his shirt pocket, he had one of the, people may not even know what this is anymore, a little spiral ringed notepad thing and a pencil. And he was taking notes about what they said. And he followed through on every single one of the items these people brought up. He would go back to Bentonville. He would send them handwritten notes. I heard your concern. Here's what we're trying to do. This really can't be addressed effectively from Bentonville. Those people loved him. So that wasn't a show. He wasn't being propped up by people, kind of, here's what you need to do to look good. That was just him. And that's how he operated. The stories about getting a $2.50 haircut in downtown Bentonville are true. Stories about the truck, buying his sport coats at Penny's. All of that stuff is the real deal, and that was just him.
And what was your role with him? Why did you get that opportunity?
I helped them create what was called the Walton Institute of Retailing. He wanted to have an in-house leadership development program for his people. He didn't want to send them out someplace for some period of time and then come back. And so over a period of about 17 years, working with their folks in-house, we created that development program for the people who had managerial responsibility at Walmart.
Incredible.
It was a blast.
I could talk about this all day, but we have a lot of other things. So you transition from that, and you actually, in a way, you continue with education. You take over BYU Idaho. What was your goal with that? Because I think there's a lot of innovation, as we were talking backstage, around education that people don't understand, even through Pathway and what you're trying to do. And I'll tee up another question that's coming, but the largest gift that I could research from Michael Bloomberg for an education institution was Johns Hopkins University, which is $3.5 billion over time. You as an organization in the church are somewhere in the neighborhood, from what I could see, $1.5 billion annually. And it's probably more than that. So this is at the core of everything that you do and believe in, is this education piece. Help us understand why this is so important.
Education is a key that opens the door to growth and opportunity. And when I'm talking about education, I don't limit that to just school. This is learning to love learning. And you can go to school, you can play the school game, you can learn how to take tests, you can get great grades, and you can be totally uneducated. The goal is, in my judgment, to learn how to love learning so when you have no idea about what to do, you can figure out what to do. Anything you learn in school is 4 or 5 years old when you're learning it. The latest conceptual developments, the latest research. So, by definition, whatever you've learned when you graduate, it's already obsolete. So, if you're relying on what's in books and what other people tell you, you're dependent totally on them. When you don't know what to do, can you ask the questions, can you dig and research and come to know what you need to do? That's what education is.
So it's
Now, can I add one other quick thing?
you can. I don't even need to ask questions. I'm just here on the side.
So I'm a professor at the University of Arkansas doing my consulting gig with Walmart. You can't have a sweeter deal than we had at that time. And I received a phone call, and they said, would you like to be considered to be the president of Ricks College? And I'm thinking, why would I want to do that? And the next thing I heard come out of my mouth was, sure. I was talking with Elder Eyring at the time. My wife and I came, we had the interview, and a few months later, I was the president. And that was a transformational experience for me and for our family. I had no desire to go be the president of a 2-year school. I had no desire to be an administrator. I didn't go into academics to do that stuff. But that experience of then being charged a few years later by President Hinckley, we're going to make this a 4-year institution. We're going to name it BYU Idaho. And I said, yes, sir, what would you have me do? And he said, you make it happen. When they interviewed me about becoming the president of Ricks College, your question was, what was my goal? They said, what would you do if you became the president of Ricks College? I said, I have no idea. I've never been there. I don't know anything about Ricks College. They said, okay.
So how many of you are in the biggest job you've ever had in your career? You are. I am.
Yeah.
You should all be. And you feel like that same response, like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what the goal is right now.
which is the goal of education. See, when you learn how to learn and you love learning how to learn, those are the very places where you get the greatest excitement because it's uncharted territory. Let's go. We got to figure this
How
out.
do you love how to learn? I was helping my 10-year-old with math this morning. He does not love to learn.
He's 10.
I know. I'm just like, I was trying to pump him up, but like, how can we love to learn? I mean, everyone here is probably on the right track in a way. How?
I think the key is discovery. You take that 10-year-old boy and you help him learn how to discover. Sometimes we want to give answers. Sometimes we want to give formulas. Sometimes here are the 4 steps. Help him go just far enough to learn how to discover. And then see what he get juiced about it. And you just keep helping that discovery process. That's what's so fun about working with students at a university. Everybody's heard this a million times. You're not giving them fish, you're teaching them how to fish. And that is exhilarating.
You take the school to a 4-year university.
Yeah.
And I think BYU Idaho's let out a lot with Pathway and some of the others. Could you describe the scope of that? And we were just talking backstage about the 180 degrees and how education's changing a lot and how we think about it. Could you share your vision for that?
Sure. It never made sense to me that we would have a few brick and mortar institutions bring a few students to those places in a worldwide church where there is such a crying need for the key of education to open doors of opportunity. When Elder Eyring was the president of RICS, you find a very interesting continuity of people saying, it can't just be in Rexburg and it can't just be for a few. So that's the birth of Pathway, to leverage those resources at these institutions so that they're blessing people all over the world who would never have the opportunity for education, not just school education.
And what does the scope of that look like? I mean, take Africa, for example.
Oh, you don't want to get me started here.
I've heard.
If you stop and think about, in Africa, many of the women are not allowed to go to school. They will speak tribal languages, and in Africa there are thousands and thousands of tribal languages. But, for example, to read the Book of Mormon or the New Testament, you got to know English or Spanish or Portuguese or French. So if they can learn the colonial languages, you then have women who can read scriptures to their children. That's what Pathway's about. And it will ultimately affect not 70,000, we get excited about that, millions and millions and millions of people all over the world who will become educated and learn how to learn so they can bless their own lives and their families.
When you, that's amazing. When you think about that in time, you know, one of the things that we struggle with, in tech, we're not known for our patience. How do you think about time? Because that is a long, long process, and your spot in the church, if you were to put time frames and you're really working on something for so many people so far down the road, how do you think about time?
Well, in my particular responsibility, there's not a specific parameter, but we're always thinking 20, 30, 50 years out. Presently, the church has 17 million members. We are in more than 180 nations around the world. By 2050, 2075, 30, 50 million members of the church. Today, the dominant language in the church is Spanish, not English. I think in the future, it may be French because of the number of members of the church in Africa in French-speaking countries. So all over the world, you're trying to think, okay, 2050, if we have 35 million members of the church, and a significant number of those are in Africa or in the Philippines or in Brazil, you can't run all of that out of Salt Lake City. We have 23 areas, kind of the world divided up into areas. There's an area presidency in each one. And a big thing that we're focusing on now is how do we get more of what we do in Salt Lake into the areas? Not because it has to address cultural needs, that's not the driver, but these are the people closest to the action in the best position to be able to address the needs that the people have. So that's what we're constantly thinking about with every decision that is made. What's the implication of this decision 20, 30 years from now? Do we need more of this in Salt Lake, more of this in the areas? That's how we think about it.
I'll never forget when we opened our second area, which was going from Provo, Utah to Dublin, Ireland. But we were hiring people. You've got to do this by volunteer only.
That's the part where the Lord works from the inside out. The world works from the outside in. You really have to think about this. And I'm not going to inundate you with numbers, but we have 35,000 congregations in more than 180 nations. The work, you can't fire these people. You don't pay them. There's no incentive. There's a lay ministry. So most of what works in the world doesn't work in the Lord's church. And that is such a remarkable challenge to work with. So,
I'd say so.
yeah. And this is the most amazing thing of all.
It works?
It works. It shouldn't work. Everything I've ever learned in my academic training says there's no way this ought to work, and it works. Because the church is growing, it is vibrant. Of course we have challenges, and of course we have problems we're dealing with. But it is growing, and if you look at many denominations, they're decreasing or staying flatline. Now, a lot of folks want to say, well, the church really isn't growing. It is. Pockets will have greater rates of growth than others, but the church is vibrant.
That's cool. When you think about technology, when you think about technology, that's been a key piece of what you've done. We're at a tech conference. How do you see tech? I mean, I get calls all the time from large software companies saying, hey, you're in Utah. I'm coming in. Can I see you? What are you here for? I'm meeting with the church. Do you know anyone? I'm like, no, I don't know anyone. But like, good luck, right? But like, that's a common occurrence coming through Utah, and I don't think we realize that sometimes when we're here, that technology can really help that process. How do you view it?
Let me give you an example. I can't compare to any other organization and how that organization did this, but because of COVID, again, 180 plus nations, 35,000 congregations around the world, and our responsibility is to oversee and regulate the affairs of the church in all the world. We got good on Zoom as fast as anybody did in being able to do this. So in the high rise, we have rooms with 8 or 9 75-inch screens, and we can visit with thousands of people anywhere in the world. So we would have conferences. My wife and I met with a large number of saints in Eastern Europe. And these people had been locked down and shut down and couldn't do anything. We were able to do Zoom meetings where they were in their homes. And my wife said when we got done with the meeting, leave the cameras on and let's just see what happens. And these grandmothers were holding up their little grandbabies. And all of these people scattered all over Eastern Europe are showing off their babies. And the smiles of these people were phenomenal. I had a meeting with leaders in a part of the United States, and they were all in their homes. which is very interesting because you can see what they're eating and drinking and the kids running through the house and all that kind of stuff.
We've seen it all.
Yeah, it's good. But anyway, we were halfway through the meeting, and this is one of the first times I did this. I said, look, is this technology thing working? Is this just weird doing this via Zoom? Or is this viable? And this one guy I called on, he said, Elder Bednar, I'm getting a little older, and sitting on those benches in church is not my favorite thing. It's kind of hard. And I've never missed a meeting at church in my life, and I never will. But this is the first time I've ever had a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles in my house, in my office, when I'm sitting in the most comfortable chair I have. I thought that was incredible. And it changed me because I was only thinking about my role. Does this work? He helped me think about, boy, this is really working for them, because this is not less close. This is more close. It was one by one in one of the most powerful ways ever.
You talked about all the infrastructure, and I like some of the infrastructure. We're having training camp at BYU Hawaii, so I appreciate that, and next week. So keep some of it, but the infrastructure is expensive. You're getting a lot of heat for people telling you how to spend the money of the church. That wasn't a softball. How do you think about that, or how can others really understand the scale of this?
Okay.
Because I'm looking at the education vision that you just painted out and saying, "Whoa, that's not free." I'm also looking at our markets going like this and where it's going. How do you think about what everyone else wants to tell you how to spend on?
Let me address two things. We have 4 overarching responsibilities. The mission of the church is to help people learn about and live the teachings of Jesus Christ, to share that message with the world, to strengthen and unite families, and to care for the poor and the needy. Now, we do this all over the world. So in terms of scope, that's the answer. And the people who want to tell us how to spend the money, I would just emphasize one undergirding principle. The assets of the church are primarily income consuming. They are not income producing.
So go deeper there.
35,000 meeting houses and facilities. They're all paid for when they're dedicated. All of the utilities are paid for. They're not passing a plate or collecting money in local congregations. That's all done through the tithes that the members of the church pay all over the world. But you've got fixed costs in the maintenance, the utilities, all of those things for all of those buildings. 315 temples in operation, announced, in design, being renovated or under construction. 4 major institutions of higher education. You don't have to be an accountant to figure out those are some big dollars. So when people say, well, what do you do with all that money? Well, there's an episode in the Old Testament about Joseph, who interpreted a dream for the Pharaoh that there were 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. And in the years of plenty, you better prepare for the years of famine. So people want to speculate about the size of the reserve and all that kind of stuff. $1 billion assisting poor and needy people all over the world annually. $1 billion for education. You just begin to think about that stuff. And it's necessary to maintain the mission of this church, which is to bless the lives of individuals and families. That's what we do.
So you feel good about where you're at? You feel like it's prudent and wise? And
I think it would be imprudent and unwise not to have a reserve.
that was unbelievable. You and I both like to golf.
Yeah.
what is it that attracts you to that, and how has that become something that you're passionate about?
I'm about to disclose my totally nerd academic background. It's very strategic. If all you do is hit the ball and then go hit it again, you'll never do well. Before you hit the shot, you have to know, if I miss the shot, where should it go? You got to be thinking 1 or 2, sometimes 3 shots ahead to play golf and really play it well. I love that.
It's fun. And how often are you able to actually get out and play? You're not going to get in trouble.
In my present life, about once every 10 years.
What excites you the most? I mean, you get to see the world on such a global level. Like, what's fun? What's exciting? What makes you smile?
My wife and I have had the chance to be in more than 110 different nations in the last 19 years. And to meet people of every religious background, culture, ethnicity. And the thing that really gets me so excited is that we are all pretty much the same. Yes, there are lots of differences, but we are far more alike than we are different. That gets me excited. And to be engaged in the work I'm engaged in. People may disagree with our doctrine, but to teach the principles of the gospel of Jesus Christ all over the earth, I love that. My California term for that is, that just gets me juiced. I love doing that. That's what I love.
That's cool. As you see the movement of tech in Utah, I was explaining in a documentary this week, they were doing something with the Jazz, and they were talking about my upbringing here, and we were driving on the freeway, and I remember my grandparents, when they were here, my great-grandparents, they got like a piece of land and were told to, or decided to come down south to help settle, and like to watch this corridor just explode. How do you think about Silicon Slopes? How do you think about how do you all think about it from a church standpoint, looking and watching this?
I think it is and will continue to be one of the hubs of technological advancement and innovation. That's a big part of the future world in which we're going to live. A lot of times people think that the leaders of the church are kind of uninformed. We have lots of opportunities to learn from some of the best people in the world about artificial intelligence and some of the latest technological innovations. And a lot of that is happening here. I think in Utah, the church provides some assistance in helping to create a climate where that can flourish. So I think it's exciting. I think this is a hub, and I think there's a bright future.
You mentioned AI. How does AI play into the church growth?
Well, I'm not at liberty to say here's what we're going to do, but you talk about some of the costs that we have. General Conference this weekend will be translated into more than 100 languages.
Wow.
It's a bottleneck to try to wait for translation into all of the languages for a Come Follow Me manual. That takes a long time. I've seen at Google some of the advancements in translation utilizing machine learning and AI. There could be few things that would help the work of the Lord advance more rapidly than that kind of technological breakthrough with translation.
It's pretty cool. I just heard like 4 new translation startups just come out of this right now. So just prepare for the inbound. Let's talk politics.
Okay.
I mean, we're just going to get into all of it. I was watching the debates last night, and I think I left more confused than I went in. you talked about us being more similar than we are different. How do you, and I've definitely heard the church's counsel is like, we want everyone to choose and align with where they feel, but be informed. You could say one thing to this audience about your view of that. What would it be as you're watching this in real time?
Well, I think most people would know that the church is politically neutral. We don't try to indicate a direction that people should take or candidates for whom they should vote. Any church that can produce Mitt Romney and Harry Reid, I think, provides pretty good evidence of that. The thing I would say about the politics is that it's very polarizing now. And people are really kind of gravitating to one of two extremes. In the last General Conference, President Nelson talked about peacemakers. He has admonished repeatedly and forthrightly the need for the members of the church to strip away racism in any of its forms. He's done that repeatedly. He's talked about the need for civility. He's talked about the need for people to find common ground instead of just accentuating the places where we differ. And not only does President Nelson preach that in a magnificent way, he walks the walk. In 5.5 years, his outreach to the NAACP has been stunning. I can't think of two groups that if you took 1,000 people and said, what two groups would never get together to work on anything? You would say the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the NAACP. But we are. It's influencing inner cities in some of the projects that we're working on across the United States and pilots that we're working on. So you can find that common ground. It is very hard work. It takes some time. And it takes all that you've got to listen and really try to understand. But in recognition of President Nelson's outreach and what he's trying to accomplish with the members of the church, he recently was awarded a Peace Prize by Moorhead College, an HBC, in Atlanta, Georgia.
Do we have a Morehouse alum here? Oh, Moorhead? Yeah. Yeah.
Another example of this. Again, this is the politics, the polarization. You wouldn't think the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the LGBTQ community could ever talk to each other. We did, started in 2015. That was the genesis of Fairness for All. The LGBTQ community was concerned about discrimination protections. The church is concerned about religious liberty. There are ways to make that work. And that model in Utah was a part of what gave rise to what we now have as the Fairness for Marriage Act at the national level. So I think if we listen to President Nelson and look at the example that he has set, Utah was able to do that in remarkable ways in 2015, and it's had an influence all over the country. So if we stop yelling long enough to listen, I think we can work some things out.
There was a lot of yelling in that debate last night. No one was listening.
Amen.
We're going into conference this weekend. We just launched a streaming service and are just trying to get it to Utah and Idaho. I can't imagine the scope of the streaming and the technology that you have. Can you give everyone a view into the scope and reach of what's about to take place this week?
Yeah. General Conference goes to hundreds of millions of people all over the earth. Over the past number of years, we've been very successful on every continent of having General Conference broadcast through local media systems. So you'll have in Sao Paulo, Brazil, they'll have 2 or 3 sessions of conference on local TV stations. And increasingly, this happens all over the world. So hundreds of millions of people see conference when it takes place. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's cool. And are you speaking? Yeah, you're speaking, right?
I think so.
Yeah, I think they're going to have you speak, right?
Yeah.
Are you more nervous to speak there or here?
The honest truth is, I get juiced about it.
That's cool. Just give us a small shout out, like just something little. No. When you think about family, right? Your son was backstage. You've got how many children? 3?
3 boys. Yep. And those 3 boys married magnificent women, and we also have 19 grandchildren.
What is as you watch them kind of grow up in this world, aside from obviously hoping that they choose the things that will help them along, like what is your best advice to them? If you were talking to your grandchildren, what would it be?
Elder Robert D. Hales was our neighbor, and he and I played golf together. And we
Once every 10 years, right?
Well, when I could go with him, I got to go more often. And as he grew older, I learned remarkable lessons from him. I've had the chance to watch some of the greatest men in the history of the earth grow old and lose some of their physical capacity. Robert Hales was a phenomenal athlete, a great baseball player, fighter jet pilot. He was the CEO of Gillette in his late 30s. This guy is all-world accomplishment.
When they were really humming.
Yeah. And so now he's in his 80s, can barely walk. And I would go sometimes on Sunday to be with him at his home and just visit. And one day I said, Elder Hales, what do you learn when you've been so capable in everything and now you're so limited in almost everything? I will never forget the answer he gave me. He said, David, when you can't do what you've always done, then you only do what matters most. Now,
when you can't do what's always done.
When you can't do what you have always done, then you only do what matters most. And he said, David, you don't have to wait till you're 80 to learn that. See, there's a lot of folks, I think, in this gathering here today who, if they would really think about that, they're consumed in some things that really don't matter. And they haven't looked up long enough to figure out these things don't matter. You don't have to be old and infirmed to learn that lesson if you're wise. If you can learn that lesson, you'll live a different kind of a life and be even more successful.
Wow. There's probably a lot of people that weren't your age wanting to go spend time with Elder Hales to learn that lesson from an older person. Is it the love to learn that you talked about earlier? You put yourself in that situation. I've been the benefit of that. If you looked at Qualtrics growing up in our board, if you look at working with Danny, he's not old, but Ainge is like, I love spending every moment with him because he's been in the NBA for 46 years. How is it that we all can learn from those people or have the desire to and get in those moments? Like, is it just that love to learn and looking for it?
I guess I've seen that in these people with whom I serve. President Hinckley was the most curious, most eager to learn person I've ever personally known.
Even in his highest capacity?
Yeah, absolutely. I watched him talk to people who had some particular skill, let's say a crafts person of some kind. And I would watch him question, quiz. Now tell me, how does that work? Show me that one more time. He was just relentless in wanting to learn. I believe that's a spiritual gift. I believe it's a spiritual responsibility. It's a spiritual capacity. And ultimately, I think it is the companionship of the Holy Ghost that produces that intense yearning to learn.
Well, our time's running out. First of all, I just want to say thank you. This is not. I know you've got a busy week. This was not on my bingo card when I came to Silicon Slopes this week. But I would say I'd be safe to say that I think everyone can take something away from this. And thanks for leaning in. And you got me to put on a sweater. And I couldn't be more honored to be here with you.
This has been, for me, fun isn't the right word. This has been truly enjoyable. And I hope there's been something that's been helpful to other people to learn about, not me, but about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who we are, what we do, why we do what we do, and the influence for good that we're trying to be in all the world. So thank you.
Awesome. Hey, give it up for Elder Bednar, everyone.